All right, thank you everyone for being here. This is the monthly meeting of Phi Theta Kappa, and we have a special guest here today to talk to us about effectively studying and using space practice. This is going to tie into a project that PTK is going to conduct this semester, where we're going to try to challenge students to use some of these techniques, to use some space practice and not cram like we sometimes do a little too much. Even the honor students say that they still procrastinate sometimes, right? So we're going to try to see if we can do some things to overcome that. And then as students in PTK, you're also going to have the opportunity to work kind of as a research assistant to try to recruit your friends and classmates to participate in the project. So we hope you participate in our project, and we hope you recruit your friends. And hopefully that improves how we perform on our final exams. Okay, so that's what we're going to be working on. That's what we're here to learn about today. So thank you all for being here. And just so we have a little bit of idea for our guests, who everyone is, if you're a student, let us know. If you are faculty or support staff, and then we have a few of our administrative leaders here. So first, I would want to thank my direct supervisor, Dr. Jan Johnson, for being here. She's Associate Dean of Business, Social Science, and Public Service, right?
That's a lot.
Yes, and we have Dean of Instruction, right, Dr. Kenny Wilson, and then Vice President of Academic Affairs, is that correct, Dr. Chris DeGeer. So thank you, our administration, for being here and supporting what we're doing in Phi Theta Kappa. And then I'll turn it over, and I forgot to ask how to pronounce your last name.
Oh, it's Nebel.
Nebel.
Thank you for asking.
Dr. Cynthia Nebel, who is from St. Louis University, has previously taught at, let me see if I remember, Washburn, Lindenwood, and Vanderbilt. Mm-hmm. And you're currently the Director of Learning Services for the Medical School at St. Louis University.
That's right.
And part of an awesome group called the Learning Scientists, a group of psychological scientists that study and teach how to learn effectively. So thank you for being here. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Nebel.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah, so today I am mostly here for the students. And so I am going to talk to you guys about space practice in particular. So as Dr. Reddington mentioned, I work with a group of other cognitive psychologists. We call ourselves the Learning Scientists. At the end today, I'll give you a little bit of information about some resources that we have available on our website. But you can see the website there. We also have our Twitter handle, although Twitter's not as exciting as it once was. But the website's there, and we'll talk about it. So the four of us all come from very similar training in kind of basic cognitive psychological principles. And all of us kind of had this similar issue where we knew a whole lot about how people learn and remember, and we wrote it up in journals, and no one ever read them. And so that just wasn't getting out into the world to the people that it could actually help. So we started the Learning Scientists. Everything on the website is free. Most of it is geared towards educators, but there are quite a few things for students as well. And basically, we just talk everything about education research. So we take the really dry, boring research, and we try to translate it into easily digestible forms so that we can get the word out to as many people as possible. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're going to talk about space practice today. On the website, we specifically focus on 6 different strategies. So space practice is one of those 6. The reason we choose these 6 strategies is because when we comb through the literature on all of the different learning strategies that are out there, these 6 have a ton of research to support their use. So we try very hard not to encourage people to do things that are not supported by lots of research. So we don't want to know that it has worked once. We want to know that it's worked 100 times with different kinds of people in different contexts. And spaced practice of all of them is the one that has the most robust research to support its use. So I'm really happy to be talking to you about it. So, as Dr. Whittington mentioned, spacing is just the opposite of cramming. We are not talking about spending more time studying. Instead, we're talking about taking the same amount of time that you would do the night before. So if you would study for 3 hours the night before an exam, instead of doing that, you spread that study out over time. That's the basic premise for spaced studying. We are going to talk about how to make this the most effective, because especially if you've got this project going on, we want to do it the best way that we possibly can. So, in order to show you why space practice works, I think a demonstration is the easiest thing to do. So, I'm going to give you a math problem. Don't worry, it's an easy math problem. It's an addition problem. It's not a math class, so that's okay. What I want you to do is, everybody in the room, please participate. I'm going to show you this math problem, and I just want you to raise your hand when you have the answer, okay? I'm not going to call on you, don't worry. Just raise your hand when you have the answer. Here we go. The administrators were really fast.
They better be, right?
We good? Okay, does somebody want to tell me the answer? 64, and does somebody want to share with me how they arrived at? There's lots of different ways that you can do mental math. Anybody want to share how they did that? Yeah?
I added the song first.
I'm going to tell you, I've done this demo with a lot of different groups, and 90% of the time that's what people do. They're like, well, little numbers are easier. So 15 and 12, that's going to give us 27, then we're going to add that to 37, and you could do it in lots of different ways, though, right? You could add all the tens digits first, and then all the ones, and then add those two. It doesn't matter. The idea is, we're going to see if doing that helps you to solve another problem, right? So thinking through how you do that, does that help you with another one? Okay, so as soon as you have the answer, I want you to raise your hand. Here we go. Okay, excellent. Hands went up a little faster that time, okay? So the idea here is, because we've done this back to back, you don't have to go through that processing again, right? You don't have to go, I'm gonna do the little ones first, and then I'm gonna do the big one. You don't have to think about it. That's cramming. And it's the same sort of processing that happens when you reread your notes, right? You've read them once, and you go read them again. You don't have to sit there and like think about what it means anymore. Learning happens when we're doing the effortful processing. So it needs to be a little bit of challenge in order for us to really get much out of it. So this is exactly why cramming doesn't work, because you just say the same thing again. You read it faster the next time. It feels good. It feels like, ooh, I've got it. I know how to math now. But in reality, you haven't learned much by doing that second problem. Just like doing the second read of your notes. You're not learning much. Okay? If I give you the same problem a week later, though, likely you're not going to remember 64, right? You're going to have to think about it again. So if we space it out, now we have to do that effortful processing again. Okay? So I mentioned the fact that spacing is one that has a ton of research. So I'm not going to belabor this, but I do just want to demonstrate that for you, okay? So you can trust me, this works well for anything that you want to do. It works well for vocabulary learning, fact learning, text passages. These are all peer-reviewed research articles. Problem solving, musical instrument learning, motor skills, surgical skills, and even continuing professional development. So it works for the adults too. Okay, so it works in lots and lots of domains. So whether we're talking about learning a new instrument, or we're talking about learning math, or we're talking about business, it's going to work in any domain. So this is something we really want to encourage all students to be doing, because it's going to help them. Okay? So I'm going to show you one actual study of like how this works and what this looks like. So in this particular study, they had students study a lengthy science text. So they just sat there and read like out of their textbook, like you would have to do for class. In the first condition, they simply read the book once. In what we're calling the masked condition, or the cramming condition, they read it and they immediately read it again. And in the spaced condition, they read it, they came back 1 week later, and they read it again. So importantly, the two groups at the bottom are getting twice as much time with the material, but there's no difference between how much time they're spending studying. They have the exact same amount of time that they're spending studying. This one is just doing it back to back. This one is spaced out a week. And then half of the people in each group did an immediate test, and the other half did a delayed test just 2 days later. So we're not talking like cumulative final here. We're talking like week of the exam. When we look at the immediate test, and this is interesting for the students, okay? When we look at the immediate test, cramming is in fact better, okay? So if you have a test like in 2 hours, cram like crazy, reread absolutely everything. Works out pretty well because all you're gonna do is just dump all of that out of your head when you get to the test. That you've done that before, right? Okay, but when we look, again, this is 2 days. 2 days later, see quite a reversal. And not only do we see a reversal, but the difference between the single and the massed is non-significant. It means that the second time they read their textbook, it was a complete waste of time. Nobody wants that, right? Nobody wants that. So much better to space out that than to do it one right after another, rereading your notes over and over again. You're not getting anything from all of that extra time. So what does this mean sort of in practice? How do we actually do this? So the first thing is that this works best if you actually schedule it out, right? You have to create a habit of doing this regularly. It can't just be, oh, I've got a deadline coming up and I've got a due date, we've got an exam coming up, so I'm gonna ramp up my studying. You have to make sure that you are consistently doing this over time, okay? So building it out in a schedule is ideal. The second thing is that this works best when there's sleep between the spaces. So I could give 3 more talks on sleep if we wanted to, but suffice to say, we consolidate information when we sleep. So if you're learning something and then you sleep, that kind of gets stored in long-term memory as opposed to just kind of sitting in your short-term memory. Okay, so sleep is really, really good for learning. Get lots of it. I attribute much of my success in college to frequent napping, so strongly recommend. Okay. The other critical piece is that we don't just want to be spacing out the things that we're learning right now. Okay. So we want to try to space and not just remember what we learned yesterday, but also think about what came a month ago, what came even a year ago, depending on how long we want to hold on to information. So if it's something within your major, and this might come back up again later in your life or next semester, you want to hold on to that for much longer. So it's a good idea to space out some review of that material and not just be thinking about what's on this next exam. As a random side note, we're seeing that right now. So Dr. Whittington mentioned that I now teach med students how to learn, and a lot of them do the same thing. They cram before the exam, but it turns out that medical school is very cumulative. So they do foundational stuff first, and then they have to think about that in terms of each different organ, and then they have to think about that in terms of the clinical application of it and the patient population. And the students who are cramming early are really struggling late because they don't have that foundation anymore. They crammed, and it all disappeared after that test. I also want to mention this really important difference between homework and studying. So the way that the American education system is sort of created is that in elementary school, in middle school, still really in high school, you're taught to do assignments, right? And that's what you do. You don't do anything extra. You do what you're given to do. You're told to read these pages. You're told to do this thing. And even in college, we see that some too, right? That you're given specific reading that you need to do before this class. And so you do that reading for that class. And then you don't look at it again. Okay? Until maybe there's an exam and you go, oh, okay, I better review all of that suddenly. Okay? So there's a very important difference between doing homework and studying. And it's important to block off time to do both. So yes, you have to do your homework. You have to do the pre-reading for class. You have to do any assignments or projects or whatever that's given to you. That's important. You need to have good grades. But if we're going to build in this spaced review, we also need to block off time for studying, for actual revision of the material that we've seen before. And so that's a little bit different. And importantly, when we're talking about spacing, it doesn't necessarily matter how much time we put into this. More is always better. But if it is a consistent 10 minutes a night before bed, that's better than nothing, right? 10 minutes of like going back over your notes from a week ago. That's pretty good. Just randomly flipping open a notebook, I'm reading a page, then going to bed. Cool, right? The key is to be consistent with it, to block off time, and to do whatever amount that you can handle. So, I'm gonna stop talking at you. I wanna have some discussion. So I can talk here with the students primarily, but if y'all remember what it was like to go to school, you can also share. So, as Dr. Whittington mentioned, we hear about this from all kinds of students, right? From honor students, med students, they all do it. They all cram. So you can talk amongst yourselves first, or we can just, there's not that many of us in here. We can all just chat together. What challenges do you think you would have trying to implement space practice the way that I've talked about today? Why is this hard? Yeah.
I would say, for one, something that forced me to at least attempt to use this strategy was, so I'm a music major, and we have things called listening exams, where we have to identify pieces that are played basically like name that tune, and like for an exam we have to say the composer, the genre, what era it was in, and what the title of the piece is. And so I have usually if I cram before those exams, it does not work. I cannot retain it by the time the test comes because I won't recognize those pieces. But it has forced me to kind of use that in a way that I never thought that I'd actually be forced to use it before.
Good. I'm just going to throw this out there. You also should look up interleaving on my website because that would be ideal for those exams.
And can I summarize? Are you saying that what once worked previously doesn't work for you now in your current classes? You used to be able to get away with it?
I would say so, yeah,
Okay.
because like you had mentioned in high school, it kind of feels like that's just the norm. But then definitely specifically for those listening exams, I was like, oh wow, I cannot, I can't use that strategy anymore. So.
I'm sorry, what did you tell her to look up? Something to say?
Oh, it's called interleaving.
Oh, yes, okay.
Yeah. Particularly good for that kind of exam. It's good for all exams, but particularly for that. Yeah.
I would say one of the bigger struggles is just time management. When you're a college student, you're running around, you got your clubs, you have your assignments, you may have experiences outside those classrooms. And I think that's the biggest problem with space, not problem, but the struggle with implementing is just finding that time to fit it in your schedule.
You guys feel busy? A little busy. A lot of people have jobs also, right? And so if you're like me, when I have 1,000 things on my plate, I have to prioritize and I have to say, okay, what's gonna just get placed on the back burner, right? And so I think you're right. It's not urgent. There's not a deadline right in front of me, and so it's easier to put on the back burner.
Which makes it hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering. To your point that you said some things goes on the back burner, I was wondering, since we have such a differentiated course load, like say it's chemistry, mathematics, computer programming, whatever, if we took 10 minutes for each of them every day, would they all get the same priority in the space of your mind, turning to long-term memory?
If you took 10 minutes for each class, each day,
Yeah.
would you retain all of it equally?
Yeah,
Is that
you're
your
saying the
question?
difficulties of it, it's just the different classes. Since it's a variety, I wonder if it would work for, if I have 6 classes, I do it for 10 minutes for each and I spend an hour a day. I wonder if I would have the same retention for each. That could be a difficulty.
Yep, you would not. So there's also something called, it's related, it's not exactly the same. I'll use a different mechanism. There's something called the buildup of proactive interference. It's the idea that as we take in information, you've all experienced this. As you take in information, the longer and longer it goes, the harder and harder it is to process, right? So if you've ever had to sit through a really boring lecture, by the end of it, you're trying to stay awake. So you get this like cognitive fatigue as you go along. It means that the stuff you start with, you're going to remember better than the stuff that you end with, unless you're taking a test like right then, and then the stuff you just saw is best. So that said, when I said 10 minutes a day, I don't necessarily mean every class every day. So if you're doing one class a day, I'm still happy because you're still doing some spacing, right? If you are doing every class every day, I would just scramble the order in which you're doing it in, so that it's not always the same class first, but you're getting kind of a mix. So it's not as if the last class you're not going to retain any of it. It's just that you're not going to retain as much as that first one because you're coming to it fresh. The other thing is that this works best in bursts. So instead of 1 hour of studying, doing 10 minutes and then having a snack and then 10 minutes and then going to exercise. And then, so fitting in time throughout your day is better than trying to do it in one long haul.
Okay. That makes sense.
Other challenges for spacing? Yeah.
Consistency. Because like even if I set an alarm on my phone to be like, hey, go do this, sometimes I'm home, sometimes I'm not, sometimes I'm in the car. It just like depends.
Yeah, so me saying do it consistently is like so much easier said than done because your schedule is not in fact consistent. Yeah? Okay. Is there anything that you do consistently do in a day? No, wait, I'm gonna wait. I'll come back to that. I bet there is. Well, I'll come back. Any other challenges?
I've got a couple of things in the chat.
Yeah.
There is a comment on consistency, so that's a theme. It's hard to maintain that. And then also, I think it kind of touches on like one of the studies you just talked about, that we feel that we're better at remembering things when we've done it recently, just the last day or two, than when we've done it over a longer period of time. There's a couple of comments on that.
Yeah. So good point here too. So spacing feels good. So we've got lots of research. I don't have another slide with this research on it, but spacing feels good. When we reread and we ask students like, how well do you think you're going to perform? You've just read something over and over and over again. How well do you think they're going to do? They usually say they're going to do pretty well. It feels good. It feels like you're learning. But then when we have them space it out and it's more effortful every time they read it, every time they look at it, it doesn't feel like you're learning as much. You're actually learning more, and you're actually better at predicting how well you'll learn. So instead of being overconfident, you are just as confident as you should be. Like you don't actually know it all, okay? So that is a true challenge, right? Is that it doesn't necessarily feel good to space things out this way. And I'm again gonna hold back because I don't want to just give you all the answers here. I want this to be brainstorming together. Okay, how do we overcome some of these challenges? So if we have challenges of consistency, what thoughts, what ideas do we have about how you could create something that looks consistent? I mean, I think it's probably hard to say, oh, I'm going to do an hour every day. That's probably going to be difficult to fit in and always have the same every day. What could you do instead? What do you guys think would work for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe try to build yourself some type of a reward function or like reward mechanism. Whatever you like to do, just work it in there, you know?
Yep, incentivize it. So I don't get to watch Netflix until I've done my studying. Whatever.
That would be a good idea to make studying an enjoyable experience. Maybe get a very nice environment going, maybe have something that yourself, your comfy blanket, get a little like music going, and make it enjoyable.
Okay, so kind of similar. If you want to be in your happy place, you have to be studying. Yeah, I like it.
Is that when you work the nap in?
In between reading chapters, get 10 minutes out.
Yes, Kim. Yeah. Well, I was just about the 6 classes, 10 minutes at a time. There's also that emotional state in there. What you see is interesting, what you see is enjoyable. There's a behavioral, there's an emotional factor in engaging that information as well.
Yeah, so that gets me into something that in the social psych literature is called habit bundling. So it's this idea that if we take something that we don't really want to do and we add it with something that we do like to do, or add it with something we consistently do, let's say consistently do, then we're more likely to do it. So I asked you, is there anything that you consistently do every day? And I'm gonna come back to you, I'm gonna pick on you a little bit here. Is there anything you do every single day? You got it, you got it.
We use the restroom every day.
Might not be the most fun way to have it, but you could.
But
You could do it.
We're more compelled to do that than actually really.
No, but I mean, my husband has a book that he keeps in the bathroom, so maybe that can work. I don't know. You want to keep your notebook in this? Things are getting a little.
I would ask my students not to.
Yeah.
That's just.
Do you brush your teeth every day?
No, I should, but I don't.
Okay. But the idea is like thinking of stuff that you do every day, right? Even if it's something as simple as I go to bed every day. At some point in time, I go to sleep. And so keeping something where I sleep, assuming that you sleep in the same place every day, keeping something where I sleep so that then right before I go to bed, I just flip it open and I read through a couple of pages and then I go to sleep, right? That is bundling something that is consistent. It's like, of course I'm gonna go to bed, so I'll just do this at the same time. So anything that you can think of, if it's exercise and you flip through your notes while you're on a treadmill, or, I mean, but it's very individualized, right? Here we're talking about motivation. So this is up to individual people to think about what is going to work best for them, right? And how they can try to bundle that together, okay? So that was consistency. We had this issue of it doesn't feel good. How can we overcome that? It feels better to cram.
I would say is get a group of friends that you have classes with to study with you, because I know personally on my exams I do better when I study in a group even with using space practice. And no, it doesn't feel good at first, but when you guys can quiz each other over material and you're like, yes, I know it now, and you actually feel like you're prepared.
So we're adding all kinds of good things here, right? So you're adding in some consistency if you have like regular study dates, right? You're adding in retrieval practice, which is one of the strategies I'm not talking about today, but is the second best strategy, which is quizzing each other, right? So having like trying to bring stuff to mind, that's excellent. We're also like bundling, right? We're bundling it with something you like to do, hang out with your friends, right? And this, it's also an accountability tool too, right? So you've also got somebody expects you to be there and they're gonna be like, hey, where are you if you're not? So all good things, I like it. Other thoughts?
So something kind of along with what Angelina was talking about. She has to, she's a voice major, she has to memorize a certain number of pieces each semester for her voice lessons, and then perform them at one time or another. So that's one thing you have to do with memory, because you don't get the book in front of you, or else you get counted down. So when I've had to do that, really chunking is the best thing for me to do, rather than trying to cram the whole thing in my mind right before my juries or before my recital period. And that is best done a little bit each day, rather than an hour a week.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, making the plan for just doing a little bit. So again, kind of talking about things in terms of bite-sized chunks of 10 minutes, of 5 minutes, of a page, whatever it is that feels realistic, right? That's less painful.
But you have to, with that, if you take 10 minutes, then you have to take a few minutes each time to review what you did the previous day, or else you may forget it.
Yeah, especially with that kind of material because it builds on it. Yeah.
It's just not in your native.
That's right. That's right. That's right. The other big thing that I would say is don't stop cramming. I said it. This is not, so I said at the beginning that I am not saying that you have to spend more time studying, but to try to tell students instead of cramming, do it this way, is probably not realistic. Instead, it's probably more realistic to say, do this a little bit each day, just a little bit each day, knowing full well that still the night before the exam you're going to cram. And that's okay. It feels good. Do it. It's fine. I'm not taking it away from you. But make sure you're also doing this, because this is really where most of the learning is happening, right? So you can still cram if you like it.
We have a couple of comments on the chat.
Yeah.
From Gabrielle to mentions using a calendar to plan ahead. And also the analogy that it's like exercising. I think this works really well. At first you want to quit and it doesn't feel like it's working, but if you keep doing it, it gets easier and you see more of the benefits of it.
I love that analogy. Yeah, I love that. And it becomes habitual, right? So at first it feels like something I'm having to add to my calendar or add to my daily schedule, but eventually it's just like something I do. The calendar piece is pretty important too, I think. So as I mentioned, I work with medical students, and I just had to give a time management workshop with them last week where I literally took everything that they have to do in a week and showed them that they can in fact do it all, because they didn't believe that they could fit it all in. And I was like, no, the problem is you're spending too much time watching Netflix, because it all fits. But when you do that, and when I did that for them, I built in time for reviewing old material, right? And for them, I did half an hour a day. But you could do that too. And it's a good habit to get into, that maybe on Sunday, you sit down with your calendar and you figure out when you're going to do all the things, right? You've got your checklist of all the stuff you got to get done that week. When am I going to do it all? So you put in the clubs, you put in the classes, you put in all the stuff you have to do. Then you look at all your homework and say, okay, I've got to get this done, I've got to get this done. Here's where I'm going to block off time to do those things. And you'll find that there are pieces of time, right, in there. And it might not always be at the same time every day. Could be, right? It could be that you do your couple of pages of notes each night before bed, but then you also can fit in some little pockets of time throughout too. Okay, so it's actually a really good habit to get into, especially later in life when you have to like work with other people on their calendars. All right. Any other thoughts on overcoming these challenges right now? Yeah.
Actually, I just thought of something. I don't recommend obviously reading and writing and studying the card, but sometimes for the things that I have to memorize orally, or memorizing lines for plays, musicals, all that kind of stuff, I'll make a recording of it and play it in my car, because I like to listen to podcasts and stuff in my car anyway. So if I can record my voice saying the things that I need to memorize and review, and then play that in my car through my aux cord, that has actually helped me a lot too, because I have a lot of drive time. So it's kind of those two basically. So
yeah. So and for folks who don't have things like that, for a psychology course, there are so many podcasts out there on psychology. The Learning Scientists have a podcast too. There's lots of things that you could access to use that time. When I was in college, I was studying for the GRE, which is like the ACT on steroids, and I made flashcards of all the words you had to remember for that test. And I would do that between classes. That was my spaced review time, was just doing flashcards as I'm walking across campus and bumping into people. It's fine. But that's what I did, right? And so it gave me a space for that spaced review that I needed to. So you just fit it in where you can. All right. I want to quickly talk a little bit about how to make space practice most effective. So there are things about feasibility of what's going to work for you, and those things are probably most important, because if you're not going to do it, this is all a waste of time. So we want you to do it. But if we were to try to maximize space practice, what would that look like? So I'm going to show you this, and this is kind of a busy slide, so let me walk you through. So this first curve here, from day 0 and down, is what typical learning looks like. The first time you've heard anything, we see a pretty steep drop-off that by day 10, you don't remember much of it at all if you don't see it again or process it again in any way. Okay, so this is a pretty standard forgetting curve that works for so many different materials. It's been repeated many, many, many times. This originally was found in the 1880s. So That's our standard forgetting curve. What you see is this review of materials over time, and what you see is that the curve becomes more shallow over time. Now this is generalized a little bit. It depends on how you're using the materials. If you're integrating it and thinking about how it applies to things in your life, it'll look a little different, right? But in general, this is what we see, okay? What you'll notice is that the same like spot in each of these where it is reviewed is meaningful. So if we were going to maximize this, we want you to be at the point of remembering approximately 80% of the material before a review. Okay, that's cute. How on earth are we gonna know that you're at 80%? Okay, so as soon as you forget 20%, that's when you should review it. Okay, so that's nice, but not very feasible. Doesn't really help us out all that much. The other thing that you'll see is this sort of like expansion along the bottom, right? So we start at day 0, that's when you learned it, and then there's a review on day 2, day 10, 30, 60. In general, that is how it should work, in general. So again, it depends on, you want to be right at 80%, or who can do that. But because the curve gets shallower over time, when you get to 80%, it's going to be further and further out. So you don't have to review the same material every day, right? If you reviewed it a couple of days after you learned it, then you can review it another week later, and then maybe a month later, right? So the idea is not that you have to review the same things repeatedly every single day. We can sort of do this expanded retrieval over time. The other piece of this is the data shows that you should space out your review to about 10 to 30% of the amount of time that you want to remember it long term. So if you want to remember it a week from now, you should review it the next day. Right? That's going to help you remember it a week from now. If you want to remember it a month from now, though, you should probably wait a little bit more time before you do that spaced review. So you'll see what I said about like feasibility and like maximizing. It's a question that I get a lot about how do we maximize it? How much space should we do? So I wanted to tell you this, but in reality, like functionally, like your ability to do this is pretty limited. So I think what you should take away from this is that if you want to maximize spacing, you should space, and then probably do this like expansion over time, right? So you don't necessarily, so once you've retrieved it, or once you've reviewed it after a day or two, you can probably put that in the, I'll review it in a week bucket. I can do it later. Okay? Do you guys have questions about that? It's kind of confusing. So now I want to talk about your project. I want to give a little bit of time for you guys to like brainstorm and think about this project. And does anybody want to share a little bit about this project? Have you guys talked a little bit about this?
We've really just started the discussion that this is what we're going to do. We haven't talked a lot about how we're going to implement it or what it's going to look like. So
We're going to do it now.
yes.
It's going to be good. So the project is basically like how can we get other students on campus to buy in and do this, right? They're not in this room. They're not hearing about the research behind it. Even if they were, they might be bored and not convinced. So how do we get them to do it despite themselves? Yeah.
I kind of like the idea of setting up, say, study days with your friends and such, and kind of utilizing these practices while you're studying with them.
How do we get them to do that?
Honestly, just suggest me, be like, hey, this is what I'm doing to prepare for the test. It might help you cement your memory.
Okay, that's
So as a faculty member, what I will say is an invitation from a colleague is going to go, I stand in front of an AMP2 class every week and talk about study buddies and getting together with someone. But a friend asking someone to come study is going to have a whole lot more impact than me standing out there saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, so if you guys wanted to have like individual impact, that's maybe one of the easier ways of doing it. More effectively. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the most difficult thing is getting them to care. I think that's the biggest hurdle, because like you can call a favor as a friend, but like you could prove to somebody that it works. Like you could walk up to somebody and say, here, I'm gonna give you a 2-digit number, can you get it back to me in a week? Or if you check it on Wednesday and Thursday, the probability is higher. So you could prove it, but the main hurdle is getting them to care. Like you call a favor as a friend. I don't know how you would build an incentive mechanism, because I think you can prove empirically that this works.
Yeah.
But how do you get like a college kid to care?
Yep. How do you get a college kid to care? What incentivizes college students? Grades. Okay, so are there any courses that this could be built into that you're required to meet with your study buddy and you get extra credit for doing it or something? I don't know.
Yeah, bonus points would be highly motivating, it's just difficult to ask them to professors.
I know an A&P2 faculty that would absolutely be happy to incentivize the PTK students to come in and present to my class and figure out some way to get them to create study groups.
There you go. So it's happening. It's happening. What other thoughts? Did you start to say something?
Oh, no, I would just agree. I think too right now. I know a lot of people would really enjoy that.
She's all about it because she just heard she could maybe get extra credits.
Oh,
She's not in my class.
Oh, okay. What else incentivizes college students? Competition. A little healthy competition. Especially if there is a prize at the end of the competition.
I was going to say food.
Food is very motivating, yeah. Yeah, it's a pretzel.
We have plenty to incentivize with.
Or status. I mean, people do things for status.
Yeah, so it makes
Just
me
to be the
like
best people.
publicly acclaimed that they won the challenge in some way.
We could do some kind of school-wide competition. I don't know how exactly we could divide college up. We could say this district overall average scores, and then whoever has the highest average overall score after finals week gets a big prize.
When you say score, you mean their space practice score,
Of course.
not their test scores. So I like this. I think we've got lots of ideas about what the reward could be. How could you make sure people were actually doing the thing? Right? So if we're gonna say, like, in order to do this, we want to know that you have, first of all, we have to decide what do they need to do to win the award? What does that look like? What do we want to ask students to do that is space practice? They're just telling them, do space practice. That's not going to be good enough. We need to define, like, how do you get that?
I wonder if it could be similar to how we have meetings like this, or even like people that can't necessarily make it in person. Obviously, there's always like a Zoom option, and just kind of like breaking them up into, okay, these people are studying this thing, or this is like independent study and stuff like that, and then you also say with these meetings you help reward that by like we'll give you drinks if you show up, and we'll record your time and stuff like that, and that would be a way to keep track of who's doing what.
I like the idea.
Yeah.
I think like adding on to what she said, like if there was like a tab like on the Jeffco website where you could like sign up or like schedule for like a study buddy for like a specific subject, and then that'll like time when you go, and then the top people could get like a reward.
I think the advisory corps could help with this. I don't know if Brennan's on this call or not, because this is a retention issue. This is a retention tool, and so I think if we get this to work the way you want it to work, I think we as advisors, as the academic advisors, we would be interested in getting the word out to our caseloads about it. I know I would. Those of you in my caseload, you're going to hear about it from me for sure. But we can get the other advisors on board with it. I think that would be another way of getting the word out.
Yeah. I, in particular, like this idea of having some sort of set sessions. I think if you did that, you would have to make sure that you are aware of scheduling issues, right? There are going to be different people who are available at different times, and you want to have a wide variety of options. and to tell people how many they need to do in order to get whatever the incentive might be, if there's a reward at the end of this or whatever, I don't know. But I like that because you know if they're actually doing it. So my concern with a lot of the other ways that you could do this is that people just want the reward and they'll just say they did it, maybe did it, right? But if somebody's there and they can count attendance, and if attendance can be virtual or in person, and the keys that they're coming together as like, this is study time, we're basically holding study hall, right? And if you come once a week, then you'll get some sort of incentive, right? But it's gonna encourage that, yeah.
I think it's a lot easier also for like students who don't really know people around here. So like they aren't really like out of luck with like trying to find somebody to study with.
That's a good point too, yeah.
The social aspect is definitely motivating. It's definitely hard for people to connect over campus. So this could be a good way as well for people to meet as well.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, first thought was just results. Like, if it really works, then the results just speak. Like, if there's a deviation, the upper quintile did the space thing. But then you kind of got to take them on their word. So I was thinking maybe there's, I don't know what software, like, the school has access to, maybe, like, some type of email campaign where you shoot back whenever you do it so you can track it pretty easy. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, hook it up to a RESTful API. Shout out Skylar Ross, he probably help us. No, but we hook it up to some API, just like a free MongoDB database, and they could just easily track it. You know what I'm trying to say?
I do. My concern would be that people would just start emailing because they want to get the, again, whatever the incentive is at the end. I don't know.
We might, I don't know if this addresses what you're speaking to, we might be able to use Google Forms.
Yeah.
And what I've found is if you make the Google Forms sufficiently complicated, like you actually have to type stuff into it, it would maybe reduce some of that, so that like, hey, I'm gonna have to say when I studied, what I studied. Like maybe we could set something up like that. Like here's what I learned, here's what was important, here's what I still have. Not too much, but like enough that you actually have to like do more than press a button. It might increase the validity that they're actually doing. Like,
Even if it said, who did you study with?
Yeah.
Maybe because maybe we're going to reach out to that person if we actually did.
Or
Right? They don't want to do that.
They also have to fill out the form.
Yeah.
Maybe that could be.
Yeah.
So there's some ways we can try to.
Or it could be randomized and give them both a number, and so they both have to type in the same number if it was like a random distribution. Like, just like people up so they don't like have communication likely. Unless they're really going above and beyond, and at that point, you know what I mean? Then they get the
It's a high effort cheating at that point to get like a
Right, they deserve the extra
or
buck.
something.
at that point.
Yeah. These are all really, really good thoughts.
I think form is a bad idea because it's like adding on top of the space practice makes it feel like you have to do more. Because then you gotta do the space practice and now you have to fill out this form.
That's a good point. That's a good point too. Especially if it was in any way complicated, right? So you would want to make sure it was a simple thing to do if you were going to have to do it. It's a good point. It's a good point.
Something we don't have the native technology existing, not to say that it couldn't be in the future. But I think part of it is if you're interested in self-reported data to be that accountability piece, or if you want something more like, are you in this actual Zoom session with us, which is then more of an external validity. But there are some apps for like habit trackers where you can have a group of friends join in and track your habits throughout a month time frame. So if you were interested in something self-reported, that could work, or the Google form suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so lots to think about. I think thinking about, you want to make sure it's something that folks can and will do, right? So if filling out a form or having to download an app or whatever is going to in any way inhibit somebody from participating, we don't necessarily want to do that. But if coming up with times that are going to work for everyone is going to inhibit people from participating, that's an issue too. There's things to think about there for sure. I think the incentive is also really important. So in the world of student motivation, there are 4 key characteristics that motivates people. If any of these are missing, they don't like to do it. So first is autonomy, having a choice about how they're doing things, when they're doing things, etc. Okay, so we need to make sure that we have choice. The second is relatedness. So they need to feel like they're, either on a team and they're working with other people, or they're gonna let somebody down if they don't show up. But people working towards a common goal. So creating messaging about this is something that like we're doing for, like this is the Jeffco community doing this, right? Things like that are usually very, very helpful. Perceived value is important. So if you let me know, we might be able to find some data that shows, in fact, maybe this data shows, these are raw numbers, but if we converted that to percentages and we said, hey, you'll remember twice as much if you do this, right? And we said, you could increase your test scores by this much or something, right? Perceived value, if this is something that matters to people, we have to think about that. And the last one is competence, which is essentially like self-efficacy or like the belief that you can be successful doing this, right? So not impeding somebody by giving them a form that's onerous to fill out and they're not gonna do it, right? Making sure that there's plenty of time so it's not like hard for them to get there. So we wanna make sure we take out any impediments that would make somebody feel like, ugh, I don't know if I can be successful in this, so I'm not even gonna bother trying. Okay? So those are the things to think about when we're trying to motivate students. We have about 5 minutes left. I am open to chatting about anything you guys want. I think we've generated a lot of ideas for you guys to go off of. But we've just talked about space practice today. If you guys have other questions about student learning that you're curious about, I am an open book. Yeah.
Actually, I have a question. So, right now, I'm teaching someone that's very young. I'm teaching some music lessons, and he's only 6 years old. And I was wondering, just from like a teaching standpoint, if this same like space learning thing, does that carry over? I'm assuming it carries over very, very well into like younger kids, or if there's maybe something that's like also really great for like memory retention for younger kids.
Yep, so all of the strategies that we talked about work for any age group. They work for students who are neurodiverse. They work for, and so space practice works for everyone. But how you do it might change a little bit. A 6-year-old might not be able to handle a month-long retention interval, right? So it might be a few minutes that you start with for somebody who's really little. And then you can still expand from there. Often that comes pretty naturally for folks when they're working with kids. In fact, we find that a lot of folks when they're working with really little kids, do really effective strategies, right? Like kids learn by being tested all the time, right? It's like, what sound does a cow make? Over and over and over again, and you wait a few minutes and you ask them again so they haven't forgotten. But that's what we do with little kids. So yes, all of these things will still work. The motivation stuff that I talked about still matters, but what motivates a 6-year-old is just going to look wildly different, right? The perceived value piece is going to be very different, but still matters, right? So figuring out why this is important to them matters. The confidence still matters. Autonomy still matters. It just looks a lot different than it does for a college student.
Thank you.
We have a question on the chat. How do we find a way to motivate ourselves to study? And there's a related question just came in. How do we stop feeling burned out? So those could maybe work together.
Yeah, so the motivating piece, I think, comes back to a lot of the stuff we were talking about before with the habit bundling and things. So it's not biting off more than you can chew. So if you can only motivate yourself to read a page of a notebook, cool, do that. That is better than nothing, right? And a lot of times once you get past that first hurdle of starting, then doing a little bit more is not so bad. But when we're looking at the mountain of stuff we have to remember, that feels like a lot, right? And so we kind of avoid that because it doesn't feel good. But if it's, you know what, all I have to do today is 1 page, that feels a little bit better. And then bundling it with other things that we do enjoy. Right, so incentivizing yourself by saying, I only get to do this thing if I complete the 5 minutes of study I need to do. The burnt out part, though, is a little different. So Using the calendar is one of those things, because once you see it all laid out and you recognize that you do in fact have more time than it feels like you do, that's very helpful. There's another strategy that is a little tangential to what we're talking about today, but the strategy is called reflective writing, and it's essentially journaling about how you're feeling at any given moment. So what happens is when we're worried about things, that just all sits up in our brains and it makes us tired all the time. That's that feeling of being burnt out. When we write it down, our brain's like, oh, all right, that's over there. I don't have to keep cycling through all of it because I wrote it down. So writing down the things that make us anxious actually opens up working memory, which allows you to learn and perform better. But then writing down the things that you have going on is kind of similar. So making to-do lists where it's like, okay, this seems much more doable when we have all of it just spinning around in our heads, like trying to make sure, hey, I can't forget to do this, I can't forget to do this. That's exhausting. And then the last piece is self-care. Our brains are part of our bodies, so taking care of your body is part of learning. And so nutrition, exercise, and lots of good sleep are critical. And then that relatedness piece is so important too. So making sure that you're taking time to socialize with other people is also really important. And I know I feel like I just gave you like 15 more things to put on your to-do list, but I think, building in the things you have to do first, then building in time for self-care and putting it all out in front of you so you can see that you can do it all is really critical. Spoken to a little camera. Other questions? Okay, so real quick, I told you I had some resources. So again, the website's there, it's learningscientists.org. There are posters and slides that have all of the strategies that we use. We have a blog, we have a podcast. We also welcome guest posts. If you guys, move forward with this project, this would make a fantastic guest blog. For students to write, whoever you want to write it, I don't care. But to author a blog talking about how that went, that would be really fantastic. So we welcome that. And then there are a few books. In particular, Ace That Test is written for college students about all of the different learning strategies that we have. And again, that's us. And I'll stop talking.
Any other questions from anyone? Okay. Thank
All right.
you, Dr. Nebel, for
Yeah.
being here.